Welcome back, spooky friends. Connie here to take you again on another movie list adventure. Today we're going to be deep diving into the world of spooky cabin camping related movies. So that way, if you're looking for the right type of camping mood, camping vibe type movies like I was, then you have a new list to choose from. Whether you're a seasoned horror movie watcher like me and just looking to refresh your memory on some camping related movies, or if you're new to the horror genre altogether and are looking for some fun new movies to watch, then stay tuned and you're going to find some. Grab your flashlight, zip up your sleeping bag, and get ready to dive into the spooky wilderness with me, if you dare. So why don't we start with the originals that paved the way for this genre, shall we? Like none other than Friday the 13th. So of course this franchise is one of the highest grossing, most well-known horror franchises of the industry, and it was a movie that actually originally came out back in 1980. So it is definitely one that has all of those good 80s vibes, definitely a whole lot of woods and cabins and lake scenery, basically everything you can think of when you think of camping and all of that good stuff. Who can think of camping movies and horror and not think of the right? That's like the epitome of what you think of when you think of the horror genre, or at least it is for me. And I mean everything from the bloody hockey mask to the giant machete to thinking of camp counselors getting unalived. All of that kind of coincides with this movie. So it's really impossible to think of camping horror movies and not think of this movie. Something always that I find enjoyable too about going and watching these older movies, from when I was not born yet, is seeing some of the original actors that we are now used to seeing their faces, but seeing them in their very early career. For example, Kevin Bacon being in this movie and being incredibly young and new to the industry is always a funny thing. Of course, I love him also in Tremors, which is also a fun watch. But something else that I love is that his daughter Sosie is also joining the horror film industry and was the star of the film Smile, which I thought was incredibly creepy and well done. And I cannot wait for the second one, which also hits theaters October 18th. So look out for that. Now, next on some originals from the 80s is Sleepaway Camp. So I had not actually seen this one until recently. I watched it for the first time a couple weeks ago, and it is from 1983. I will say that I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would for it being, an older movie. But I don't know how I feel about the end of it. And fair warning, I mean, if you watch this one, let me know in the comments how you feel about the ending. I just kind of sat there dumbfounded for a second, like, what did I just see? Like, what did I just watch? And is that really how they ended this? I had some feelings on it, and I definitely would have changed it personally if it was me. I feel like so much would have been better had they actually just made it where the person who ends up being the killer just kind of, stares off into the camera versus what they do in the ending. And, if you haven't seen it yet, definitely check it out. I mean, like with all, older movies of that time period, a lot does not age well, so fair warning on that. There's also a incredibly high amount of cursing that is done by a lot of the child actors in this movie, which is also indicative of the time period, and that's even by today's standards, so be prepared. I definitely was not expecting it. Even though I know, back in the 80s, standards were definitely not the same as they are now, but just know and be warned that that is a thing in this movie. But I am really curious to know what you think of it and the ending if you have seen it. Now, let's discuss the ones that would have me paranoid and probably hiding in my sleeping bag if I dared to watch these at an actual campsite. So the first one on that list is going to be, or the first one I'm going to talk about is the Blair Witch Project. So this one definitely is one that revolutionized, the industry because it popularized the found footage style of movie, which now, is very well known, and we've seen that across the board in a lot of different movies. Even if it's just featured, it definitely had a feel of its own when it came to that. It was new, it was edgy, it was definitely different, and I would say that that is a major factor that worked to its advantage to make it such a gem in the horror genre. So I think they did a lot with what they had. The idea of found footage of people going into the woods, realizing that they're lost, is scary enough, but to add the creepy occult factor into the mix, and you have the makings of a great horror film. Also, I think anything that kind of combines that Twilight Zone feel, for me, is always that extra layer of creepy, because I personally love the Twilight Zone, especially the original black and white series. I rewatch it pretty often, but the fact that they go through that whole scenario where they are kind of lost and keep trying to find their way out of this area and keep figuring out that they're circling back to the same spot. It doesn't matter what movie that's in, how many times I've seen it, that will always bother me. It will always creep me out to no end. I don't know about you, but that's just how I feel about that scenario in general, just having no way out. That's horrifying to me. But speaking of making wrong turns and wrong moves in the woods, Wrong Turn is definitely one that sticks with you after you've watched it. So it was made in 2003, and it's starring Eliza Dushku, and starts out with a whole group of friends who are basically just traveling in a road trip down the backwoods roads of West Virginia, and their car, of course, breaks down, because of course it does, and they end up stopping on the side of the road, and another car ends up hitting theirs and just completely wrecking their car, so they're stranded, and they end up looking through the woods and running into the worst possible people, which are these cannibalistic, awful people who, one of them climbs trees and has the most disturbing laugh you can imagine, and it just kind of goes from bad to worse, and whatever you're imagining about it right now based on my description is probably worse, but it is definitely one of those that sticks with you, that's for sure. And the updated version that they did in 2021 is actually in the Appalachian woods, and that one involves a group of kids, or college-age kids, who go into the woods, against the warnings, of course, of the local people, and they end up running into like this cult type of group that lives out there, and it just gets darker and darker as it goes down to where the father of the main girl ends up having to come and look for her there. I think that what I've read about the Appalachian Trail area is just as horrifying as what any horror movie would have, because they've basically said that they cannot even guess how many unfound bodies there are in that area, because there are some areas that are just so steep and inaccessible that there's no way for them to actually look in those areas or investigate them. That would give me the creeps. I don't think I could ever camp in a place like that personally, but it definitely looks scenic in a lot of the pictures that I've seen, but I would definitely also fear getting lost. That's just me. Speaking of getting lost in crazy places, is The Hills Have Eyes. So this one I think bothers me a little bit more than most of these movies on my list, just because there's so many bad choices that are made in this movie, including the only two strong guys out of this family of 5 choosing to kind of just abandon the women and children and walk off to find help for their car. I don't feel like that makes any sense at all. But then again, what does in decision making when it comes to horror movies? Almost nothing. But basically, they're a family of 5, and they're pulling this RV, and they're trying to make their way to San Diego, and they of course make the wrong turn, wrong move, all that good stuff, and end up in this area that just happens to be inhabited by these people who have been physically and mentally affected by nuclear fallout from nuclear testing in the area where they are. And yeah, it's pretty horrible. There's a lot of things in it that are incredibly disturbing, but it is definitely a movie that you won't forget once you see it. Next is The House of Wax. So this one actually stars Paris Hilton in it. Well, I wouldn't say stars. She's kind of more of a minor character, but because she's one of the more well-known names in this movie other than Chad Michael Murray, I would say it's kind of stars her. And it isn't entirely set, of course, in a campground, but because some of the more eventful things that happen in the movie begin at a scene where they're camping, I feel like it still counts. And it isn't really as scary, I would say, as some other horror movies. It's more disturbing, I guess, and creepy. Not to mention that there are some of the craziest unaliving scenes, including someone being mummified while alive in wax, which is, pure nightmare fuel, that's for sure. So if you've never watched this one, definitely check it out. Next is Cabin in the Woods. So this one is definitely different than almost any other horror movie, I would say, in the way that it's kind of like if you mashed 13 Ghosts, Cabin Fever, and The Truman Show. And that sounds really bizarre, but once you see it, you'll know exactly what I mean. But there is definitely a lot of dark humor, and you won't be able to guess at all where it's going or how it will end, or at least I couldn't, which was definitely my favorite part of this movie. I don't like it when I can predict too easily where a movie is going or where a plot is taking me. So if that's something that annoys you too, then you'll probably like this movie as much as I did. Speaking of cabins, Cabin Fever, of course, is one I had to add to this list. So for me, this one is like if Ick became a movie, then that is this movie. It is just off-putting and gruesome and goes from the weirdness of a random stranger child yelling pancake and biting someone all the way to someone shaving over open wounds, which is just horrible and it makes you cringe and still makes me cringe every single time I see it. But there's so many things in this movie besides it just being set in a cabin that make it very disturbing in the right ways if you're looking for a disturbing cabin camping movie. So definitely check it out if you've never seen it. Speaking of terrifying cabins, Evil Dead. Evil Dead is definitely one that I would say ranks very high on my list of movies when I think of gore and just horrifying death scenes, period. Because they are so intense and so gore-filled, and just every horrible possible thing you can imagine is pretty much in this movie. I am, as sacrilege as it might be, I am partial to the newer one, personally speaking, just because I really like the updated way that they put it together or filmed it. But man, if the scene involving the hypodermic needle and an eye socket does not horrify you on so many levels like it did me, then I don't know what to say, because that scene is still very hard for me to watch. But it's definitely one of those that if you're looking for something in a cabin to freak you out, that is a great one. Another, I would say, slightly more tame and more socially or more social dynamic type conversation piece movie would be Knock at the Cabin. This one is one that came out more recently, and this one actually stars ex-wrestler Dave Bautista, who was also more well-known recently for his role on the Guardians of the Galaxy, which is great movie, and also from the Army of the Dead, which is easily one of my most favorite zombie movies recently, just because it is an interesting dynamic. And if you've not seen that one, definitely recommend checking it out. It is on Netflix, or at least it was last time I checked. But this one is definitely a more serious role for him, for sure. And what's interesting about this one is that it puts you in two different perspectives. You are kind of constantly questioning who is sane and who is not, who's telling the truth, and also thinking at the back of your mind, what would you do if you were put in this situation? So basically, it is a family who comes to this cabin, and according to these strangers who show up, they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and are facing where they're being told by these strangers that they have to make a decision to sacrifice one of them in order to save humanity. So of course, any normal person, logical thinking person is going to think this is a load of hooey, these people are insane. So the whole time you're just kind of wondering, is there any validity to what they're saying? Because little by little, things start to kind of happen that make you wonder if they could be right, and it just kind of escalates further from there and makes you wonder, if you were put in that situation, what would you do? So this is one that I would suggest watching with people that you like to have open dialogue about those type of movies with, because it is a fun conversation piece, I would say, for sure. There's deeper layers that they kind of want to bring to the forefront of your mind. On that same note, I would say The Happening is also one that I would consider a camping cabin type watch, just because of its relation to nature, and nature kind of being deadly, and also the fact that we're kind of constantly in battle with nature. So I think in that way, The Happening is definitely one of those thought-provoking movies, because it does make you think about how we as human beings affect everything around us, and whether or not one day those things could fight back. So if you've never seen it because you heard it was a ridiculous plot, I would say definitely give it a chance. If I heard the plot to the movie, I might have thought the same thing. But if you really give it a chance and you watch it, and then you think about all of those underlying questions or philosophical thoughts you're supposed to be basically thinking about while you're watching this movie, then it'll make a lot more sense on why it is what it is. Next, on a little darker note, is The Descent. So The Descent is one of those that to me is a burned in your brain type of movie, and it definitely scarred me for a long while after I watched it, because there are several factors in this movie that standalone are already terrifying. The dark in and of itself, the exploration of dark spaces, tight spaces like caves or crawl spaces, and darkness adapted monsters is all, every single one of those things, like I said, on its own is already horrifying, but adding them all together, definitely something that makes you scared pretty much every minute that you're watching it, because they do such a great job in this movie of building your anxiety that you absolutely can't help but feel anxious pretty much the entire movie. And I would say that if you are someone who is claustrophobic or scared of the dark, this one is probably not going to be one for you. Next on my list is VHS. So VHS is kind of one of those amalgam movies where it's a combination of a bunch of shorter stories, and it's done in a found footage style. So it's kind of like if Faces of Death met Blair Witch Project, because it is these people who break into this house, discover the person that lives there is basically deceased, and they find the body in front of this pile of tapes, and they put one in to see what he's watching, and basically you're then put into their first-hand perspective of watching these videotapes and seeing what's on them. Every scenario is more disturbing than the last, but one of the reasons why this one's on my list is because there is a scenario where they see some footage of people out in the woods and now taking a camcorder with them, from that time period, and when they hold it up and are looking out at the forest area, actually see a figure of a man moving around, but it's made out of I would say kind of what tracking looks like on a VHS. And it sounds kind of silly, but it's actually pretty creepy and scary. So if you've never watched VHS, I highly recommend checking it out. The next couple movies I'm going to talk about are more serious vibe to them and more of a slow burn. So if you are someone who looks for more substance or storyline, or intense acting, then these are definitely more your vibe for sure. The first one on that list is Misery, and this one is Kathy Bates at her absolute best. She does an award-winning performance literally in this movie, and it's her and the actor James Caan, who is one of his most famous roles is from The Godfather, and he was also in Elf. And yeah, it's a crazy movie, and basically it starts out with this writer, and he has a kind of a pattern that he goes in when he's trying to write his books, and he goes to this remote cabin, but there's a lot of bad blizzardy type weather, and he's not familiar with driving in that, so he ends up veering off the road and wrecking his car, and it's kind of trapped. Well, Kathy Bates' character is his biggest fan, and she goes and she pulls him out of the wreckage and rescues him. Well, basically, you're put along for the ride with the main character, and along with him slowly realizing that this rescue is more of a nightmare, and it just gets crazier and crazier as it goes on, and you just kind of slowly realize how much of a psycho Kathy Bates' character is. And there are definitely some scenes in that movie that for sure stick with you. So if you've never watched that movie, absolutely check it out. Another slow burn that I like is The Witch, starring Anya Taylor-Joy, and this one is kind of like if you mashed The Crucible and Hereditary, because it has a lot of those sinister, somewhat satanic vibes of Hereditary mashed up with the time period of the 1600s of The Crucible and adversity to witchcraft type vibe. So it definitely has an ending that leaves you very shocked, but it is a slow burn, so you do have to prepare for that. So don't watch it if you're really, really tired. You definitely need to be wide awake for this one if you're going to watch it. It has a lot of great creepy factors to it. The scene alone where she is sitting with an infant and then, she's playing peekaboo with the infant, and when she covers her eyes and reopens them, the baby is gone. That alone, I don't know, something about that is just level 10 disturbing. So highly recommend watching it if you liked Hereditary or you like time period movies from the 1600s. Next on my list is The Empty Man. So The Empty Man is definitely a slower start movie. It is more of a take you along the ride, kind of tailspin into insanity type vibe to it. It starts though with this group of people that are going out to camp and explore this kind of wilderness area, and of course they explore the wrong cave that has some cult stuff in it, and bad stuff happens to them, and then it ends up putting you along with the detective who's investigating all of it, and then slowly realizes how the cult itself has kind of been manipulating everything, every step of the way that he's been investigating. So if you're into that at all, if any of that sounds interesting to you, then this is definitely a good one to watch. Next one, also speaking of cults, is The Ritual. So The Ritual is one that I saw on Netflix, and it's about a group of guy friends that go out to camp basically in the wilderness, in the woods. And it's also definitely a slow burn, and a lot of people feel some type of way about the ending. However, from what I understand, it is also a kind of a reflection or a representation of the stages of grief. So if you are okay with kind of looking deeper into the meanings of a movie rather than what it is on the surface level, then I would definitely check this one out. But also, just generally speaking, it has a lot of really good deep woods creepy vibes to it, so that's exactly why it's on this list. Next, we're going to get into the more fun side of my list, and these are really the ones that you could honestly watch and be at your campsite in the middle of the dark and it not really be that scary, and you might honestly just laugh at these particular movies. So the first one is the Leprechaun franchise. Now, these I have watched since I was a kid, and of course I watched a lot of inappropriate things for my age when I was younger. I was a latchkey kid and was allowed to watch things on cable unattended. So of course I, have always loved scary movies, and so for me, I was always excited anytime I saw that a scary movie was on the lineup or on the TV guide, if you remember those. And so the Leprechaun movies are just funny, I would say. I don't think I really ever got scared when I watched these, even when I was a kid, just because I honestly thought the Leprechaun guy was pretty funny looking. Just the little outfit and everything. And the way that he kind of rhymes and says rude stuff to people always struck me as hilarious. So that is the reason why this one to me is more of a dark comedy than anything else. And it definitely reminds me a lot of the Tales from the Crypt show that I also used to watch when I was a kid, and still definitely enjoy the Tales from the Crypt movies. But another fun thing is I actually like when I go back and watch older movies that I haven't seen in a long time, and I realize that there's a famous or well-known actor now that I didn't realize was famous or was going to be famous at the time. So when I went back to rewatch these movies to introduce them to my husband, I actually realized that none other than Jennifer Aniston is the main actress in the first movie, which I just think is pretty funny because she doesn't really ever seem like, to me, especially in her more recent work, as someone who would ever participate in a scary movie. So if you haven't seen it and you're just curious to see how she acts in the movie, definitely check it out for that alone. Next on my list is The Final Girls. So this movie stars Taissa Farmiga and Malin Ackerman. So Taissa Farmiga is actually the younger sister of the actress who actually plays Lorraine Warren in the Conjuring franchise, and they actually look a lot alike, but I hadn't really thought about it very much until I saw it as a trivia piece on one of the movies that I was watching. But anyway, so Taissa and Malin Ackerman play mother and daughter, which I think is kind of funny because they don't look anything alike, but it really doesn't take away from the movie at all. So the mother is actually an actress who really only had one role she was famous for, and it was playing a final girl in a slasher film. And the young daughter actually loses her mom pretty early on in a car accident, and she ends up going out with her friends to watch a re-showing of the movie at a theater, and somehow ends up getting sucked into the movie, supernaturally with her friends, and kind of gets to reconnect with her mom. And it's kind of a Groundhog Day meets an 80s slasher film type of movie, because the movie basically just keeps resetting itself until they figure out how to get out. So it is interesting, kind of keeps you guessing what's going to happen, and it's got a ton of dark humor in it, so definitely a fun watch. Next on my list, as far as fun watches go, is Cocaine Bear. So this one is just crazy start to finish. I actually saw the preview for it and was like, a bear on drugs attacking people? I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about that. So I didn't initially watch it in theaters, and it ended up coming out on home release on Peacock, and I watched it pretty much immediately when I saw that it was available because I was curious to see what it was like, and I was not disappointed. It was hilarious. It had, the gore in this movie puts horror movies to shame, that's for sure. I am not usually super squeamish when it comes to gore scenes on movies, but man, this one definitely gives the other ones a run for its money. It has dark humor, it has, other elements that keep you interested in the other characters. So it is just a really well-developed script all around, and I definitely enjoyed watching it on several different levels, but also the fact that there are little nuggets of true story that this movie is actually based on that Peacock actually also banked on by making a documentary about those parts that were true and kind of where they developed them, and I thought that was pretty cool. So if you like trivia after watching a movie, then you'll actually get to make that a double feature if you watch it on Peacock. Last but not least, my ultimate favorite cabin camping horror movie, I would say, of all is Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. So this movie stars Alan Tudyk, and you'll know him best as Pirate Steve from the Dodgeball movies, and also from the more recent work that he's done on Resident Alien as the main character named Harry. And he is hilarious in that show, so if you have not watched, definitely check that out. Last I checked, it was on Peacock still, so highly recommend watching that. But Tucker and Dale are basically just two regular guys who buy a cabin, and they are planning to make a weekend out of restoring it and kind of doing a fixer-upper job on it. And they go into this town, and they just happen to stop at a gas station, and at the same place these college kids stop by as well, and they have these interactions that just kind of go from bad to worse. And these college kids kind of assume that they're bad news, they're like, backwoods psychos or something, and everything just kind of, they're like these awful accidents that keep happening that reinforce for the college kids that they're evil, but really they're not. And these college kids, in an attempt to avoid being attacked by Tucker and Dale, somehow accidentally unalive themselves basically all over Tucker and Dale's property. And it is as slapstick and hilarious as you can imagine based on my description. And if you've never seen it, I highly recommend you watch it because it is just funny start to finish. And it is absolutely one that you can for sure watch while you are at a campsite because it's just funny. There's too much humor in it for you to really be scared of anything. So definitely recommend watching that. Also, if you're looking for more movies to watch or different lists that I've made, definitely check them out in the link that's going to show up here. But also, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Bye, guys.